When my family stopped inviting me to gatherings, I stopped funding them. That's when they remembered who kept the lights on. The day I realized my family had removed me from their lives was the same day I paid their electricity bill, again. I was sitting at my dining table, half asleep from work, when I got the payment confirmation from the power company. Not even 10 minutes later, a photo popped up on my phone. My family, my entire family, were at a big gathering I knew nothing about. They were all smiling, eating the kind of food I usually paid for. At first, I thought maybe it was an old picture. But then I looked closely. New clothes. Decorations. Even the little kids looked taller. It was from that same day. A hot sharpness rose in my chest. I zoomed in, hoping maybe I missed a message. But no, there I was, not in the photo, not in the room, not even in their plans. It wasn't the gathering that hurt. It was the fact that I had paid for their comfort, their bills, their emergencies, yet they couldn't bother to invite me. That moment, something in me twisted. A quiet, painful snap. It was the first time I allowed myself to see the truth. I was only part of the family when they needed something. I didn't contact them immediately. Instead, I scrolled through everyone's page, checking if it was truly a mistake. But the more I looked, the colder I felt. There were birthday dinners I wasn't invited to. Backyard cookouts. A surprise party. Even a little engagement celebration. All without me. In some photos, I saw things I bought, like the blender I gifted my cousin last year. Or the speaker I bought my uncle. They smiled with their new gifts, but I wasn't standing anywhere near the photos. My hand shook a bit. I remembered all the nights I picked their calls with half-open eyes, rushing to send money so someone's rent wouldn't expire. When I was sick with fever 2 months earlier, only one cousin texted. The rest were silent. But they needed my money, so they remembered me. I kept scrolling until I realized something. They didn't just forget to invite me. They were living full lives without me, but living those lives with my money. I put my phone down slowly. For the first time, it was clear, they valued what I gave, not who I was. And that truth sat so heavily in my chest that I couldn't ignore it anymore. The next day, I tested something. I turned off my data for a few hours. When I turned it on again, the messages came in like a flood. Please help with small money. We need to buy food. Did you forget the monthly support? Light bill is due. But one message stood out, don't forget the meeting tomorrow. Meeting? What meeting? My heart tightened. I checked the family group chat, the one I created, and noticed it had gone quiet. Suspiciously quiet. That's when I realized they had made a new one. A secret group chat. One I wasn't part of. But they still remembered to message me separately whenever money was needed. They cut me out emotionally but kept me financially. I typed, what meeting? Then paused. Why ask? Why demand entry into a space they didn't want me in? I deleted the message. After years of jumping to help, I let the phone ring when it buzzed. I didn't explain, didn't question. I just sat there in the silence I had never allowed myself to feel. And in that silence, one sentence circled in my mind like a warning, you are a wallet, not a family member. And it was time to change that. The following week, I made my first real move. I didn't send the usual monthly money. I didn't cover anyone's bills. I didn't send something small for anyone's kids. I simply stopped. And the silence that followed was loud. At first, my phone buzzed with casual reminders. Hope you haven't forgotten us. Just checking in on the allowance. The children need food. I ignored every message. By the third day, the tone changed from soft to demanding. Are you not sending anything this month? You know we rely on you. Why are you acting strange? But what hit me hardest was a message from my aunt, is this about the party? We thought you were busy. You're always busy. That excuse again. Busy. As if missing every single event for months was just coincidence. As if they couldn't send a simple message to confirm. Their lies were lazy. Their excuses careless. And I realized, for years, I had allowed myself to accept crumbs while giving them a feast. So I stayed silent. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't bending. I was standing. 5 days later, the mask finally fell off. My uncle sent a message so sharp I felt it physically. So because we didn't invite you to one small gathering, you want to punish us? Grow up. Punish? Grow up? This was the same man whose rent I paid when he was 2 weeks away from eviction. The same man who called me a pillar of the family. My hand trembled, not from anger, but from the sting of being used so openly. I typed, "I'm not punishing anyone." Then I stopped. Why explain myself to people who never explained anything to me? I deleted the message. Minutes later, I received a long voice note from my aunt. In her soft, fake sweet voice, she complained that things were hard and I was making life harder by withholding support. She said they didn't invite me because they assumed I needed rest. Another lie. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't controlled by guilt. I was finally choosing myself over their expectations. And it felt peaceful. The following Sunday shifted everything. My younger cousin, the only honest one in the family, called me secretly. She spoke in a rushed whisper. "They're having another gathering tomorrow," she said. My breath caught. "Another one?" "They said not to tell you," she continued. "They said you'll still send money even if you're not there." My stomach dropped. So this was the truth, cruel and clear. They weren't avoiding me by accident. They were excluding me intentionally because they believed I was too desperate to stop helping. They thought I needed their approval more than they needed my money. My cousin apologized. I told her it wasn't her fault. When the call ended, I sat with my eyes closed. The truth hurt, but it also freed me. If they could celebrate without me, they could solve their problems without me too. I made a promise to myself that day. I would never again pay for spaces I wasn't welcome in. My heart wasn't turning cold. It was simply protecting itself from being burned again. A month passed, and the silence became a battleground. They thought I would break first. They believed guilt would push me back into my old role. But something inside me had shifted permanently. One afternoon, a cousin messaged in the group chat. "Light bill is due. Should we wait for you?" I replied with one word, no. The chat went dead. Then came private messages from everyone. Some were polite. Some demanding. Some outright manipulative. "You know we depend on you. Don't be wicked. Are you trying to embarrass us?" But what touched me most was the slow unraveling. The fight started. Who will buy fuel? Who is responsible for food? Why is there no money? It was almost shocking how a whole family, adults, were stranded because one person stopped giving. But it wasn't pride I felt. It was sadness. Deep sadness that my love had become their laziness. But this time, I wasn't rescuing anyone. They would learn to survive without draining me. They had to. 2 months later, the message I had been expecting finally came. It was from the family head. The same man who once said gatherings would go on whether I attended or not. His message was simple. "We need to talk." I waited 2 hours before replying. "About what?" His answer came quickly. "About the family. About everything." I agreed to meet. Not because I wanted to fix things, but because I wanted clarity. When I arrived at his home, he looked older, drained. He cleared his throat, looked at me, and said words that sounded almost unreal. "Things have been falling apart. We didn't realize how much you did until you stopped." For the first time in years, he looked uncomfortable. Guilty even. But I didn't rush to ease his discomfort. I simply listened. Because right then, it became clear, they didn't miss me. They missed the support. They didn't regret excluding me. They regretted losing their safety net. And that truth settled in my chest like a heavy book. Finally, they saw who kept the lights on. But I was no longer sure they deserved it. The first month without me was quiet. Too quiet. At least for them. For the first time in years, my phone did not ring with urgent requests. No one asked for help with fuel money. No one begged for school fees. No one asked me to pay a bill before their light was cut. I felt a strange mix of peace and sadness. But mostly peace. I started using the money I usually sent them to fix my own life, my car, my apartment, my savings. It felt good in a way I didn't expect. Still, a part of me wondered how long it would take before the silence broke. And then it happened. At 6:12 p.m. on a Tuesday, my aunt called. She never calls unless the matter is serious. I watched the phone ring. I didn't pick. A minute later, my cousin called. Then my brother. Then my uncle. Back to back. Something was wrong. Or maybe, something was finally catching up with them. I didn't answer any of the calls. I simply watched them come in. One after the other. Like falling dominoes. And for the first time, I wasn't the one rushing to fix anything. The calls didn't stop. They doubled. It became almost funny. These were the same people who said I was too busy and too distant. Now they wanted my attention more than ever. I decided to answer only one call, just to understand what was going on. My aunt was the lucky one. The moment I said hello, her voice burst through like a fire alarm. Please, are you at home? We need help. Your uncle's house has been disconnected. I leaned back. Disconnected? I repeated, acting confused. Yes. They cut the electricity. Everything is off. We thought maybe you could assist, just small support. Her tone was suddenly careful, almost humble. Very different from the usual commanding tone she used whenever she assumed I owed the family something. But I wasn't invited to any gathering, I said slowly. So why should I interfere? She went silent. I could feel the shock through the phone. Ah, don't say that. It was just a misunderstanding. A long one, I added. She begged a little more, but I didn't give in. I simply said, I hope things work out, and ended the call. And for the first time, I felt no guilt. 2 days later, my mother came knocking at my door. Not calling, knocking. She almost never visits me. She stood there looking uncomfortable, as if pride was physically choking her throat. Can I come in? She asked. I stepped aside. She sat down, cleared her throat twice, and finally said, There have been issues. I raised a brow. Issues? Yes. Money issues. Everyone is struggling. Things are not easy. I nodded politely, waiting for her to reach the point. Your cousins had some problems with school fees. Your uncle's business is down. And your aunt, her shop rent is overdue. She took a breath. They were hoping you could help. I almost laughed. They cut me out, remember? She looked down. I know. And that was wrong. But you are part of the family. You shouldn't let temporary anger stop you from doing what is right. Temporary anger. That's what she called it. I leaned forward. They didn't push me out temporarily. They pushed me out fully. Silence. Heavy and ugly. So now that things are hard, I'm needed again? She said nothing. And that was my answer. My mother stayed for another 20 minutes, talking in circles, trying to soften the truth. But nothing she said changed the fact that they remembered me only when their pockets were empty. After she left, I sat thinking about everything I had done for that family, the school fees, the food, the emergencies, the bills. I gave and gave until I barely had anything left for myself. But the moment they felt they didn't need me for entertainment or gatherings, I became invisible. A ghost. Supporting them was like pouring water into a basket. No matter how much I filled it, it always leaked. That evening, my phone buzzed with a message from my cousin. "Please, can you send something small? We are in darkness." I read it twice, then put my phone aside. I wasn't trying to punish them. I was protecting myself. For the first time, I let them face their own reality without me stepping in to save them. And I realized something important: if you always show up, people forget what it costs you. But when you stop, they remember. They always remember. By the next weekend, the entire family group chat had turned into a panic center. Every hour, someone updated the group with a new problem. No fuel. No electricity. No money for food. Someone even complained about generator noise coming from neighbors while their own house sat in darkness. I stayed silent. They didn't greet me in the chat. They didn't ask how I was doing. They only complained. Then someone finally typed my name. Not nicely. My uncle wrote, "If someone in this family who used to help would not keep quiet, some of these things would be solved." Used to help. I stared at the message. No, please. No, can you assist? No, are you okay? They expected me to jump simply because they called my name. I typed one sentence, but I wasn't invited to the last 2 gatherings. It shook them. The chat went silent for 5 whole minutes. Then the excuses started. It was a mistake. We thought you were busy. You didn't say you wanted to come. I responded calmly, "It's okay. Handle things the same way you handled the gatherings." And I left the group. Leaving the group chat caused an explosion. My brother called instantly. He spoke so fast I could barely understand him. "Why would you leave? You're escalating things." I replied, "I'm just giving everyone what they gave me, distance." He sighed loudly. "But you know they depend on you." I smiled at the honesty at last. "That's the problem," I said. "They treat me like an ATM, not a person." He tried to argue, but the truth was too clear. They wanted my support, not my presence. They liked my money more than they liked me. After the call, he sent me screenshots of the group chat. Some members were angry, others pretended to be confused, and a few actually blamed me for their bills. That was the breaking point for me. I realized they didn't just forget me at gatherings. They forgot I had feelings too. They forgot I had limits. That night, I made a decision: if they want to reconnect, they can start with sincerity, not need. Until then, they will manage their darkness. Literally and emotionally. The next week brought something unexpected: silence. Real silence. No calls. No messages. No guilt trips. Nothing. It felt strange at first, like standing in a room after a loud generator finally goes off. Too quiet, too still. But then the peace settled in. I started sleeping better. I took myself out for dinner. I enjoyed my own company without worrying about anyone's deadlines or emergencies. One evening, I checked my bank account and almost smiled. My money was still there. Growing, not disappearing into other people's problems. It felt like breathing fresh air after years of inhaling smoke. I didn't realize how heavy the burden had been until I dropped it. But peace never lasts long in a family that runs on chaos. By the end of that week, trouble came again. This time, not through calls. Through a knock at my door. A loud, desperate knock. When I opened it, 3 of my relatives stood outside, looking exhausted, sweaty, and frustrated. They didn't even greet me. The first thing one of them said was, "Please, we need your help. Everything has scattered." I didn't invite them in. I stood there waiting for the truth. They started talking all at once. Their generator had broken. Their bills were overdue. The children were at home because fees hadn't been paid. Their food shop had closed down. It sounded like their whole world was collapsing. And apparently, I was the missing piece they needed to fix everything. I asked one simple question: why didn't you want me at the gatherings? They froze. No one answered. I repeated the question. Only then did one of them mumble, "We thought you didn't really fit in anymore." Fit in. As if gatherings were a fashion show and I was out of style. "So I wasn't good enough to sit with you," I said, "but good enough to pay your bills?" Their eyes dropped. No excuses. No lies. Just shame. And for the first time I wasn't angry. I was clear. "I won't help you," I said softly. "Not because I don't care. But because you only value me when you're drowning." They begged. They pleaded. They promised to change. But I had heard those lines too many times. I stepped back and closed my door gently. And the silence that followed was louder than anything they said. Weeks passed, and the reality hit them like a cold wind. No calls. No messages. No requests. Their chaos didn't stop, it multiplied. Their generator stayed broken. The food shop closed. The kids went to school with no lunch money. And still, I didn't budge. I watched from a distance, observing the consequences of their actions. They had always depended on me, but now they had to learn responsibility. Pride kept me silent, but not cruelty. I realized they had never experienced failure, never had to face the messes they created themselves. And for once, I let them sit in it. I went on with my life, working, laughing, and spending on myself. My apartment felt warmer. My fridge was full. My bank balance grew. I wasn't saving to prove a point, I was saving to heal from years of being used. And yet, every time I heard about their struggles, I felt a faint tug in my chest, a mix of sadness and vindication. They had finally remembered who kept the lights on. And they would have to remember it the hard way. Then came the first apology, not from the loudest voices, but the quiet ones. My younger cousin sent a message late one night. "I'm sorry," she wrote. "I didn't realize how much we depended on you. We should have included you." Her words felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. It wasn't enough to erase the months of exclusion, but it was enough to confirm my feelings had been valid. I typed a reply, "Thank you for saying that. I hope you remember it for the future." She replied instantly, grateful, almost relieved. For the first time I understood that being silent had power. Silence forced them to see the truth without me yelling it. The ones who were truly remorseful were visible now. The ones who only wanted me back for my money would remain quiet. And that distinction mattered. I realized something profound: you don't have to teach people lessons with anger. Sometimes, the absence of what they took for granted is the loudest teacher. And in this absence, they would learn respect. And respect was the only thing I wanted to give from now on. A month later, I received an unexpected knock on my door again. This time it was my brother and my uncle. Their faces were worn, eyes heavy, shoulders slumped. "We need to talk," my brother said. I let them in. They hesitated, scanning the room as if expecting to see hidden resentment. I sat, calm, and waited for them to speak. My uncle finally broke the silence. "We underestimated you," he said quietly. "We took your support for granted. And now, we see how much we lost." I didn't respond immediately. I wanted to see if they meant it. They went on, detailing everything that had gone wrong in their lives without me. They didn't ask for money. They didn't beg. They admitted their mistakes, acknowledged their selfishness. It was painful to see how hard reality had hit them, but I stayed silent. Listening was enough. When they finished, I said, "I'm glad you've learned something. But it won't be business as usual anymore." And for the first time, they looked shocked. They realized respect was not optional. It was now the rule. The next few weeks felt surreal. My family started involving me again. Not because they wanted control, but because they understood my value extended beyond money. Invitations came, yes, but with genuine intent. A cousin called to ask if I wanted to join a small gathering. A distant aunt asked for advice on household planning, not funds. And when I declined, no one protested. I felt like I had been invisible for so long, yet now seen for the first time, not as a wallet, not as a provider, but as a person. I realized that for years, I had measured love by how much I gave, but now I measured it by how much they respected me. And respect, I learned, was far more satisfying than obedience. Slowly, the balance of power shifted. The family no longer assumed they could take. They had to ask. And it felt good. Quietly, I acknowledged my strength. The strength of silence, of absence, of self-respect. They had finally remembered who kept the lights on. But now, they had to earn my presence. It wasn't easy. Old habits die hard, and every time a crisis emerged, I felt the urge to step in. My mother called one evening, distressed about overdue bills. My instinct was to help immediately. But I paused. I let her feel the tension that had been brewing for years. I reminded myself that my help without recognition had caused the very disrespect I had endured. She hesitated, frustrated, but eventually solved her problem on her own. And for the first time, I felt pride. Not for what I did, but for what I didn't do. My absence had forced growth. My boundaries were finally teaching lessons my presence never could. They had built their comfort on my sacrifice, and now, without it, they had to face reality. And I could live without guilt because for once, I was seen. Seen for what I truly was, more than money, more than support, more than a family resource. Finally, I was acknowledged as a person. And it felt amazing. By the next month, gatherings began again, but they were different. I was invited, but not expected to pay. I was welcomed, but not obligated to contribute. My presence mattered for the first time. And when I arrived at one family dinner, I realized something I hadn't before: they looked nervous. Not hostile, not angry, but careful. Careful because they remembered what happens when they take me for granted. Careful because now they knew that respect was not optional. I smiled quietly, sipping my drink. They didn't notice, but I was savoring my victory. This was never about money. It was about dignity. It was about being seen. And finally, after years of being invisible, I felt valued. The laughter around the table felt different because I knew they appreciated more than my presence. They appreciated my boundaries, my strength, my decision to stop being used. And for the first time in my adult life, I felt truly free in my family. The lights were still on, but this time, they were on my terms. A few days later, my youngest cousin approached me quietly. "Thank you," he said softly. "I didn't realize how much you did for us. I thought it was just normal, but it wasn't. You've taught us something important." I looked at him and nodded. It struck me how long it had taken for someone to understand. My absence had become a lesson without cruelty. They had learned responsibility, appreciation, and respect. Not from lectures, not from anger, but from the reality of losing me. And I felt satisfied. The quiet gratitude from someone young, who hadn't yet learned entitlement, felt more valuable than any thanks I had received in years. I realized that my family would never truly change overnight, but the seeds were planted. They now understood the cost of taking someone for granted. And that understanding was enough. Finally, I wasn't a wallet. I wasn't an ATM. I wasn't invisible. I was seen. And being seen felt like victory. Months went by, and my life flourished. I no longer funded the chaos, but I watched from a distance as the family learned to stand on their own. Some nights, I still received panicked calls or messages. But now, I answered differently. Calmly. Clearly. no rush, no guilt, no bending to old habits. My boundaries had become my shield. The family's respect slowly strengthened as their dependence shifted. They remembered, every day, who had kept their lights on. But I no longer carried the weight of their problems. They learned what it meant to manage without me. And I learned something crucial: the best lessons are the ones taught by absence, by boundaries, and by showing your value without being taken for granted. For the first time, I felt the power of my own life. And the freedom that came with it was better than anything I had bought or paid for anyone else. I had finally rewritten my role in my family. And it felt perfect. The first family gathering I attended after months of absence felt different. I walked in calmly, greeted everyone politely, and took my seat. No one expected me to pay. No one assumed my presence meant sacrifice. I watched my relatives serve themselves, share responsibilities, and handle situations I had once carried alone. They looked at me differently now, not with entitlement, not with expectation, but with recognition. And in that moment, I smiled. They had remembered. Not because I reminded them. Not because I begged to be included. They had remembered because I had stopped being their safety net, their automatic solution. I had stopped funding what they took for granted. And through that, I had forced them to see me for the first time in years. They respected me. They valued me. And most importantly, I respected myself. I had turned absence into power, silence into strength, and boundaries into lessons. I had kept the lights on, literally and figuratively. And this time on my terms. And nothing felt better.